Hi, welcome. Thank you for being here. Let's talk about digital sovereignty, a topic that is all the rage these days, together with AI, I guess. But AI wasn't a thing really 10 years ago, was it? But digital sovereignty also wasn't a thing, but it should have been on the agenda, but it wasn't. So, but you know, as they say, the best time to get started with digital sovereignty was 10 years ago, and the second best time is now. So let's start with talking about it anyway. So first things first, just because I can't help myself, and some of my fellow countrymen in Germany, they have a tendency to pronounce the word a bit differently, or like, you know, okay, so a lot of people say it's sovereignty, but there's actually no I at the end anymore, so it's digital sovereignty or sovereignty. Okay, but just so gets out of the way. Now, predictions are hard, especially when they concern the future, but here's a bit of an outlook like 9-10 years ago, 10 in the future, not ago. 2035, if we do nothing, Europe will be behind, having failed to invest in AI infrastructure. Using proprietary as a service and closed AI, big tech has absorbed all interactions between 8 billion humans, or then it's maybe 9. And California, Washington, and China are the only states or countries that are able to afford universal basic income. Other nations are being downgraded and piling up sovereign debt. You think this is a very grim outlook? Yes, but why do I say this? Like today, the combined worth of big tech, these 5 companies, is $15 trillion US. Add NVIDIA, which isn't, you know, considered big tech, well, the classic 5, but now is one of the big tech companies, adds another 4.5 trillion. I mean, obviously these values fluctuate a bit with the value on the stock market, and they have instant access to more than half of humanity. And just to compare, the German GDP is around $4.6 trillion a year. And Germany is the 3rd or 4th largest economy in the world. Right now, obviously, I know this is comparing apples and oranges, you know, the GDP compared that to the stock market value of companies, but just to put it in perspective, right, these 6 companies are valued more than Germany produces in a year, okay? Yeah, thanks to Jan Lechel, I don't know if you know him, for the inspiration for this one here. So here is this was the title page of The Economist, British paper, in 2018, already 8 years ago, and it said, "The battle for digital supremacy." You know what I find disturbing in this picture? Where is Europe? It's not even there, not even in the background, okay? And if you look at what Kai-Fu Lee is saying, so Kai-Fu Lee is a leading researcher on AI. He has served as a co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Global AI Council and was named Time's 2023 list of the 100 most influential people in AI. So he kind of knows what he's talking about. And he said, there's no hope for Europe in the AI sector. And this was also 8 years ago. I don't think it has really changed or improved. You know, 8 years obviously is a long time in tech, but yeah, has anything big come up in Europe? I don't think so. And also, just to put this in perspective, in 2023, NVIDIA sold 550,000 H100 chips. And the largest clusters in Europe are in Germany with 10,000 chips. And in France, 1,000 chips. Wow, what a discrepancy here. And just a few weeks ago, I listened to an interview with Erica Brescia, the former COO of GitHub, and she said, everything in AI comes down to chips and electrical power. If you want to be one of the winners in this market, you need to ensure you have access to both. And okay, again, Europe, AI, I mean, we have access to it, but we don't produce it ourselves, like really in a big scale. And electrical power is always a bit of a problem, and it's very costly. And it's one of the key factors that is hindering our industry, right? So, and now let's look at this worrying sequence. America first, what I mean here is this is under Trump 1 before Biden. And then COVID happened, and in Europe we realized we can't even produce face masks. Most of our pharmaceutical drugs come from other countries, like, for example, India is big on this. And then the war happened at the European borders, or in Europe, you know, Russia attacking Ukraine. And now we have Trump 2, and it's America first again, but now this time America first against China. And Europe is completely left on its own. Now, there are a lot of what-if scenarios that I find worrying. It says, so what if there is a conflict between China and Taiwan? Then the supply chain stops, right? Taiwan produces a lot of semiconductors, integrated circuits, computers, and other electronic components. And obviously, you know, you see how vulnerable the whole supply chain is with what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now. Then what if there is a conflict between North and South Korea? South Korea makes a lot of memory chips. Then there is a problem. What if the USA, who is our natural ally, has been for a long time, is all of a sudden not our ally anymore? What happens if an overseas server goes down, or there's a proprietary app that suddenly shuts out entire countries on a geopolitical whim? So this lack of certainty is driving governments everywhere to find self-reliant solutions to put the steering wheel back into their hands. Not just in Europe, by the way. I just talked to someone from Japan, and they said, yeah, we don't want actually to invest a lot more with Microsoft things. Yeah, so another example, the US can degrade their functionality of the fighter planes like the F-35 or F-16 through software and network control. So they, you know, we have these planes, but if someone in the US says, yeah, Europe, we don't really want you to use them anymore, then they can't like do it in real time, yeah, but they can cripple features like mission, data files, radar, other crucial system through blocking software updates. And they could potentially just disable our fighter jets. Yeah, okay, and one more last thing maybe. You may or may not have heard of the sanctions against the International Crime Court from the US government. This is an example that suggests that Microsoft temporarily restricted access to mail services for the ICC's chief criminal prosecutor, Karim Khan. And this highlighted the potential vulnerabilities linked to foreign service providers. Yeah, okay. Oh, and the Cloud Act, let's not forget the Cloud Act. The cloud, like cloud in capital letters, you know, the US law that requires US companies to hand over data that is under their control. Even if Microsoft says, well, you guys, this is in Europe, the data servers are physically located in Europe. If it is under Microsoft control, they will have to give over the data if the US demands, if the US government demands, and the users in Europe, they don't even need to be made aware of this. Okay, so a nice picture. So digital sovereignty is a thing for all these reasons and more. So what is it? It's the ability to, or for a nation, organization, or individual to have control over their digital infrastructure, data, and digital assets, and to operate independently and securely in the digital realm. And essentially, it means it's about the power to make decisions about technology and data rather than being reliant on or controlled by other entities. Okay, and there are a lot of definitions of digital sovereignty, but more or less along these lines. Now, there are many areas of digital sovereignty, and one is data and cloud computing. And a lot of people actually reduce it to this, but it's far more than just that. It's also about the physical infrastructure. Where are the data centers and the networks? Where does the hardware come from? Then the connectivity, access to the internet in a reliable way, net neutrality, right? Somebody controls the internet, obviously they have all the power. Net neutrality needs to be there as well. Cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is arguably the most important aspect of digital sovereignty because it serves as the foundation for protecting data, a nation's data, or individuals' data, infrastructure, communications network from cyber threats. Okay, cybersecurity. Not going to talk about this now, but this is, as I said, arguably the most important thing. Identity management, artificial intelligence, and software. And now software, again, is a big thing, a big aspect, operating systems and business software. And let's look into this a bit more closely. So FOSS, free and open source software, is more and more seen as the key to digital sovereignty. Actually, the key, I would say. Right? In other words, it's about owning and governing your digital destiny. So here's software. On the left, we have operating systems and IT infrastructure, so Windows, Office Suite, Teams, and all this. Then on the right, tools, middleware, utilities, software used by engineers and developers to design, test, and build software and hardware. And in our case, Mercedes-Benz, automotive industry, also graphics for vehicle design, simulation, for software crash tests, and so forth, right? Then business software, that is all the software that's used to manage a company's business operations, CRM, ERP, accounting, HR systems, everything like this. And then in-car software for us in the automotive industry, again, another important aspect. So infotainment, navigation, advanced driver assistance systems, engine control units, ECUs, over-the-air updates, all of these things. Software that runs directly in the vehicle and controls its functions. Okay, so I assume you are probably familiar with this, but just to, recall, software means a lot. Now, this guy, Paul Michael Romer, he is best known as the chief economist of the World Bank and for co-receiving the 2018 Nobel Prize in Economics and for his work on endogenous growth theory. And so he had this is just a couple months or so ago, an interview with a big paper in Germany, Die Zeit, the Times, yeah. And so he talks about he makes a lot of interesting points, I think. So in 2021, the US President Joe Biden, he established a cybersecurity committee in response to various cyber attacks on the United States. And it turned out that a series of errors made in Microsoft's Azure cloud platform were to blame. And Romer says that one should not only avoid the Windows operating system, but also Microsoft servers altogether, because he says they're not safe. And the scary thing is that the Trump administration abolished the cybersecurity committee again. So this is like abolishing the National Transportation Safety Board because you just don't really want to know why so many planes crash. I don't care. So this situation is intolerable, right? You can't rely on the United States at the moment anyway. Yeah, maybe it was a serious mistake to rely on the private sector alone in this matter. So, for example, Meta, right? Facebook. Meta earns its money from people using its services like Facebook or Instagram a lot. The longer people are on these platforms, the more money they make. So it doesn't care about people being satisfied or happy, just to stay on the platform. And what's the most reliable way to keep people on the platform? That is to incite people against each other. And that's why we have such a big division in our society, and not just in Europe, across the world, basically, in all the societies that use social media so much. And I have actually read a couple of books about this. I like psychology, and so I like a little hobby, and it's really the usage of social media makes people unhappy, like bottom line. And heavy users of social media, when they cut down, they get happier again. And that's because of this, because Meta wants people to stay on the platform. So it creates all these upstirring. And I mean, all the populists on the rise worldwide, that's because of this. Sorry to say, right? But So, we don't need such social media platforms. How social is it anyway to incite people against each other? Okay, but anyway, so Wormer argues, don't leave the future solely to Silicon Valley. Europe should declare its freedom or digital independence and leveraging open source to prevent societal division by business models like the mentioned Metas. And he said Europe should become a hub for open source software, using it and regulation to ensure a secure information system. So he brings up Airbus as a great example of collaboration across countries in Europe, and he says you should probably do something like this again for the digital realm. Yeah, so let's look at Denmark. You all know this flag. Now, a few months ago, most people didn't know this flag, but you know it now? Anybody know the flag? Greenland, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, so what, I don't need to dive into this really, but the thing is that Denmark said, okay, what could the US do to us? What could a president in the US do to us really? I mean, not military invasion, but like take away Microsoft from us. Like, for example, tell Microsoft, hey, you can't do business in Denmark anymore. So it probably could do this, but he has a much more effective instrument. And so Denmark investigated what can he do. And so the US president could declare a national security emergency and ban Denmark or any country from receiving security updates as of now. And obviously that will create a problem, not today, not tomorrow, but probably in a week. You have a serious problem. And so Denmark said, this is, we can't do this anymore. So they are now not changing everything all at once, but they're doing a lot of tests, and in several of their offices and ministries, they're switching over from Microsoft to, for example, LibreOffice and Linux, and really wants to replace it. And they said, if it doesn't work, we'll go back, but we will give it a shot. And there are a lot of state governments in France and elsewhere that have already done this. The ICC, the crime court, they're switching to Open Desk, for example, as well, as an answer to this. Yeah, national security. You probably have heard that Trump is building this big ballroom next to the White House, or as another building connected to the White House. A judge stopped it a few weeks ago and said, hey, you can't, this is not your private property. Yeah? And Trump said, it's a national emergency to build the ballroom. Okay. Like with the logic, we built missile systems in there as well, so we need the ballroom for national emergency security reasons. Okay. So, now, there is a bit of a paradox when I say digital sovereignty and open source. What do I mean by this? So the problem is, or the paradox is, that the ecosystem we are relying upon for our independence is predominantly under American stewardship, from core governance bodies like the Free Software Foundation or Open Source Initiative, Creative Commons, and so forth, and also development platforms like GitHub and GitLab. So the goal is self-determination, but the needed infrastructure is built and managed elsewhere. Now, GitHub is the biggest platform for open source. GitLab, probably number 2. GitLab, of course, it does exist in an open source version, so maybe that's a bit of an advantage. I mean, to be honest, I'm not saying move everything away from GitHub or GitLab, right? I'm not saying that, because they're actually 2 really nice platforms for software development, right? But so, what is the reason for the concentration in the US? The US tech ecosystem has evolved through a positive feedback loop and favorable conditions. For example, access to investors, a lot of money, a large domestic market, relaxed data protection regulations, business-friendly policies. Yeah. But also, here's heads up, most open source contributors are likely European. It depends a bit on the statistics, it's not exactly clear, but it looks like most open source contributors come from Europe. At least something, right? With probably also maybe Chinese, or it's a close call, and the US probably number 3, India and Africa catching up. So the recommendations here, or my recommendations, are to have a clear view of the existing open source ecosystem to understand why of it is so much concentrated in the US. The things I mentioned, but look into it more deeply. And then support European open source organizations, as well as a lot of small and medium enterprises. And I'll get to that in a moment, and independent companies. Yeah, and simultaneously foster a healthy, vibrant, and balanced global open source ecosystem based on European values and mutual respect. So, when I say one of the favorable conditions in the US is relaxed data protection laws, I'm not saying, hey, we need to do away with our good data protection laws. We just need to maybe make it a little better. But that's what I mean with European values. Data protection is a European right, is a European value, I would say. So, yeah, I'm also, by the way, I'm not saying that we should abandon all proprietary solutions, right? They have a right to exist as well, and I think a vibrant, healthy technical ecosystem needs both. All right? So, here an example, and sorry about the slides, I don't know what happened here. So here you see, this is Ola Källenius, he's the CEO of Mercedes-Benz, and he's signing a memorandum, a letter of intent, sorry. Behind him on this side is the Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg, the state where Stuttgart, the headquarters of Mercedes, is located. And so Ola Källenius and also the CEO of Bosch and then Porsche was there, and the University of Karlsruhe and the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and they signed a letter of intent to strengthen the open source infrastructure in our state, Baden-Württemberg. And the goal is for the state government and the small and medium enterprises to learn open source practices from larger companies like Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, Bosch, and so forth. Yeah, because see, the thing is, we as a big company, we have a legal department. We can understand all the license requirements that come with open source and everything around it, but the small enterprises, they can't, right? So we invite them to knowledge transfer sessions and say, hey, this is how we do it, maybe here, use it, let us help you, okay? I think this is a really good way how the state government facilitates knowledge transfer for the better good of everyone involved. So, another thing, now we're coming to the positive sides, yeah? So, the EU Sovereign Tech Fund, there's a study by Open Forum Europe. In case you don't know it, Open Forum Europe is a Brussels-based non-profit think tank which explains the merits of openness in computing to policymakers and communities across Europe. And they came up with this study. And the result is we need to fund Europe's open digital infrastructure. There is a chronic underinvestment, and we should model it after the German Sovereign Tech Fund, Sovereign Tech Agency, or to a degree anyway, because that's a good example, have something like that in Europe. And so the ask is here 350 million euros for 7 years, which isn't exactly a lot of money on the big scale. And so identify Europe's most critical open source dependencies, maintenance security, because if you don't fund this sustainably, then it's foreseeable that the critical components will degrade, and this is the infrastructure that we rely on, okay? We have like two of our colleagues, two of our executives, Magnus Östberg, who's our chief software engineer, and Markus Retschad, he's our what's his exact title? Well, he's in the software-defined vehicle. He's the vice president of digital car technologies, I think it was called. So they wrote the foreword, and we also, a colleague and myself, we contributed to the content. And now we're promoting this, or the Open Forum Europe is promoting this. And So Thibaut Kleiner, he's from the EU Commission. He will also give a talk, I'm not sure today or tomorrow, about this, or he will include this as well, I think. So the good thing is, the politicians, they're now listening. Like, a year ago, they were like, oh, what's this digital sovereignty thing? What's open source? And a year later, at the last Open Forum Europe's policy summit, they were like, we need this. It's very good. So let's see. So what does this all mean for us? So basically, support and promote open source solutions wherever you can. Utilize FOSS to reduce dependencies on individual vendors, and especially important, actively participate in FOSS projects that are relevant to the company. The Linux Foundation just came out with a new study on the return on investment of open source participation, active participation, and turns out that the return on investment is 3 to 5 times of what you put into, active participation, like contribute back, than when you just use it, okay? For example, because you have to maintain forks and so forth, okay? Search for that study, it's very interesting. Launch open source initiatives of yourself to set standards and drive innovation. So as Mercedes, we have just a month ago published our open source FOSS disclosure portal under the Eclipse Foundation. It's, if you look, it's called Eclipse Disuko, D-I-S-U-K-O. So that's the Japanese word for disco, disclosure portal. We call it disco, but disco is not a name you can actually put a brand name on it, or put and have it as a trademark. Thank you. So Disuko, if that's a thing in your company, SBOM management, look into this tool. I think it's quite nice. And contribute back, obviously, right? So here are some more examples. Software-defined vehicle at the Eclipse Foundation. Probably many of you have heard of it, because it's also a track here. So that I think is a very promising thing. Then open source review toolkit at the Linux Foundation, or server, again, at the Eclipse Foundation. So just to make sure you don't misunderstand, not everything can or should be open source, right? Companies, as I said, proprietary systems are still there for a reason, and not every proprietary thing is bad, obviously, right? But companies should, I think my recommendation is companies should rate their systems according to maybe 3 criteria. So this is a Zendis suggestion. Zendis is the, what's called the OSPO of the German public entities, yeah? Zendis, Z-E-N-D-I-S. So 3 criteria with which you can rate your system. So the freedom to switch, portability, vendor independence, and then number 2, the ability to shape or custom design or develop a system, and number 3, the ability to influence or participate. Yeah, I won't go into details because that's a whole talk in itself, right? But go over your especially critical systems, rate them according to these criteria, and then you see where you stand with your digital independence. And it's probably not very good, but then you can start working on it. Maybe you can switch systems from one to another. Then, of course, migration costs are a thing, and so forth and so forth. Yeah, but then you can go from there. Remember, every procurement decision is a decision for the future. All right? So especially when you make new procurement decisions, keep that in mind. So as I mentioned, open source is not just about consuming, obviously, it's about giving back as well. And here are some voices from 2 prominent people in our organization. On the left, you see Katrin Lehmann, she's the CIO of Mercedes-Benz, and she said already a while ago, a healthy open source culture is a very smart entrepreneurial investment in the future and social responsibility at the same time. And then the before mentioned Magnus Ösberg, Chief Software Engineer, or Chief Software Officer. He said, of course, open source software is not a one-way street. For every piece of code we use, we have a responsibility to contribute something as well. And this is the summary of the talk. Europe's digital sovereignty runs on open source, and quoting Gabriele Colombro from the Linux Foundation, he said, Europe's digital sovereignty will not be built behind walls, but in the open. Okay, and with that, I leave you and thank you for your attention. I'm still here for a few questions. Thanks very much. So if you have questions, I think there's probably a microphone here.
Yeah, thank you for a great presentation. So the case that you described before in, I think it was Denmark, about their administrations going open source, this already happened like 20 years ago in Spain. There's a study case for that. In short, it sucked. It was horrible. I mean, they went for Linux and for LibreOffice and all that. And essentially, they said, this is terrible. We don't want to use it. Please give us Microsoft Word and Excel back. So I don't want to bring down the room here now with this thing. So my question to you is, what is the driver? What do you think will be the driver for these things to improve and be good enough? Because I think the driver in this case was money. There was not enough investment to make LibreOffice good enough. There was not enough investment to make Linux good enough for the circumstances. So how do we change that this time? Where does the let's say, the push come to bring developers and to bring people into all these initiatives so that they don't suck again? And
yeah, okay, very good question. May I ask, in Spain, where was this exactly?
Sorry, this was in the region of Extremadura, more or less in the south of Spain.
Yeah.
And yeah, they went, I believe, they even made their own Linux distro. It was called Libre Linux or something
LibreOffice?
Like LibreOffice, but then they also had their own Linux distro. Maybe. Okay. I can't remember the name right now. Yeah. But yeah, the teachers didn't like it. The people in the administration didn't like it. It wasn't good enough.
Right. I completely understand that. So what will be the driver? I think the driver now is the necessity, because more and more people are realizing this is needed. Also prices, I mean, so Microsoft raised their prices for companies 40% last year and 30% again this year. And they can do this, why? Obviously, because they have the monopoly, okay? Have you ever heard of, so LibreOffice is one thing, OpenDesk from the Zendesk is one thing, and another thing I would like to mention is OpenCloud. Have you heard of that? Yeah, and so I just had a talk with Frank Karliczek, who's the CEO of OpenCloud, Nextcloud, I'm sorry, Nextcloud. And he also had, we asked him that question, like, but people like the look and feel of Microsoft and it's hard for them to switch. He's like, yes, that's completely understood. That's why, Nextcloud is not trying to be too different so that people can understand and work with it right away. So I think these are all factors that will contribute to more and more people and companies change. Yeah, and then put money into it so that it will become better and better. Yeah. Thanks. And so question here.
Yeah, you mentioned the impact of big tech on organizations, and looking at those same organizations of big tech companies and their potential influence, what are your thoughts about their involvement with open source nonprofit foundations? So if your foundation is dependent upon those same big tech companies, all you've done is potentially inserted 1 degree of separation from the same dependency.
Yeah.
So I'm curious your thoughts around that.
A very good point, because so we're at an Eclipse Foundation event, and the Eclipse Foundation gets its money from the members. So especially the strategic members, but also the other members, right? They pay smaller amount. Strategic members pay more. Now, Google just joined, and so as Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation, we are also a strategic member, and I think that's great news. I love to have Google at the table, but when now you have more and more and more of these big tech companies as strategic members, it means it's good for the Eclipse Foundation, more money, but then more big European companies need to show up as well to balance the sheet, right? And so Google also, by the way, they're giving the Eclipse Foundation money to develop trainings, so that's good. They do play a good role as well, right? So I don't want to be misunderstood as saying they're all bad, because Microsoft, I think, is not a bad system what they develop and everything. Yeah, so it is a bit of a balance, right? Essentially. Do you have a different opinion, or it's just wondering, right? Yeah. So. See, Microsoft, I think, and they understand that Europe wants to move away from relying solely on big tech, and so I think they're also opening up a bit more. Maybe they don't see the need yet. I'm not sure. Hope that answers a bit what. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I have 2 points. I wanted just to add to the Spanish example. Don't forget Munich.
Munich?
Maybe you can tell something about why it's failed in Munich?
Why it's failed? I don't know why it's failed in Munich. But I think Munich is doing quite a good job in open source, isn't it? I mean, I know that years ago they tried something which failed. I don't know why, but yeah. But I think now they're back on open source track again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is about the strategic partners. So, as I saw it and remember it, all strategic
difficult word
partners are businesses, right?
For the Eclipse Foundation.
Yes.
Well, there's also like the European Space Agency, for example. I mean, it's a business, but semi, right?
Yeah. Are there any momentum that countries are going to become partners?
Of the Eclipse Foundation?
Yeah, or other open source foundations?
No. So other open source foundations are associated with, but they are not strategic members, right? They can be okay. Now I'm not myself. I mean I'm on the board for the Eclipse Foundation, but I'm not employee of the Eclipse Foundation. So all the details, forgive me if I'm not 100% sure. But so I think the other foundations can become a member, but they're associated members, I think is what it's called, right? And then also, I think a number of universities and other public entities are associated members as well.
I'm wondering which European company could stand against Google, Meta, or whatever, when all of them, they become strategic members, right?
Oh, if you're a strategic member, your voice is the same as from anyone, I mean, one vote is one vote, yeah? And there are also some committee representatives and contributing members who don't pay, but they're elected, and their vote is also the same. Yeah, so, thanks. Jeremias.
So, thank you. A comment to the Munich thing. The project there failed because of politics. So at the end of the day, it was lobbying by Microsoft, and the mayor of Munich changed. So there was a new mayor, and the new mayor said, "Hey, Microsoft, come to us, set up your headquarters or some parts of like some important infrastructure in the area of Munich, and we switch back." That was the main problem. The mayor later on gave an interview in one of the German magazines, IT magazines, and he was saying, this thing, like in Munich, it was about money, about saving money. And he was saying, in 10 years or in the future, it will come back as a sovereignty issue. So that was the point. They also tried to make their own Linux distribution, which I don't think is the best idea to do, but they optimized also a lot of software behind that. So it's not just switching, but it's also policy and it's training of the employees, because every new software is a change, regardless whether it's open source or it's closed source. So you have to do all three things.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. But also, yeah, I mean, as you say, train your employees. That's why something like Nextcloud is also trying to be as close to what you are familiar with, so they, there are not such high training costs. That's one thing. And yeah, City of Munich. Okay, good. Thank you for this. And but I know they're now really talking a lot about open source again at the City Munich Council. Like I know a couple of people from the OSPO. Munich even has an OSPO, and they're quite engaged.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have kind of two very related questions. The first one, obviously the elephant in the room, the AI. The tools that we mostly use in the industry today are, unless you work at a company like Google, the tools are going to be hosted by some other third-party company. There's no great open source AI model. There's nothing that runs locally on my machine that matches the performance of the top models.
Yep.
So how do you actually foster the building of a open source AI model that performs similarly to the top proprietary one, so that people have an open source alternative? Yep. And then additionally, even open source stuff in Eclipse Temurin, we leverage GitHub and GitHub Actions and all this stuff that's great, but it's Microsoft proprietary as part of building the JDK, right? So how do you, even at the Eclipse Foundation, make sure that the vendor lock-in isn't there with tooling like GitHub?
Yeah, so the first question is with the AI, how do you foster that? I mean, so I'm not an AI expert. I mean, I'm an IT guy, so, but I'm not deeply involved in the AI space from a development point of view is what I mean. So there was the case with the Chinese AI system that was open source that for a moment threatened to break everything and then didn't really, but I think that was one example that, the power of developing something together in open source could potentially stand up to the big models. So I'm not exactly sure what is needed that it will really be the same or better, but here I'm kind of hoping that something will come up. But what we can do as Europe is just foster such initiatives with, what I mentioned earlier, with favorable conditions, also obviously with money. I mean, in the end, money will be needed, with a sovereign tech fund and things like this. Yeah, so that's kind of my take on it. Thanks. Yeah, any more questions? No, if not, or if something comes to mind later, I will be here. You can approach me and just poke me. And other than that, oh wait, can I take a picture of you? Like, that's what, that's a thing these days, at concerts, they always, do. So everybody, yeah, cheers. Awesome, thanks very much.